While I've read quite the truckload of lit RPG over the past whatever, Daughter's Defender by Kiki is the first lit RPG submission I've received. Like any indie submission or any book, really, it could go either way. I pretty much hold my breath for the first three chapters of any new novel. I'm surprised I haven't passed out doing this, and Daughter's Defender was no different. The question is, did the story make me want to continue or discontinue breathing?
No love writing advice. Cut the fluff.
In the spirit of not being too clickbaity, I will say I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Yes, I have some critiques, but as someone who's still relatively new to lit RPG and enjoys anything with a post apocalyptic vibe, played a lot of Fallout back in the day, Daughter's Defender is my sort of sauce, my sort of literary sauce. But a word of warning. Daughter's Defender isn't a fun, humorous lit RPG adventure. It's dark, depressing, and a little messed up. We've got an alien invasion apocalypse situation in a contemporary setting. Why do they invade? Reality TV, naturally. I don't think it's quite at cliche status yet, but the reality TV angle is wearing thin. I mean, does anyone do it better than Dungeon Crawler Carl? Not a critique, just an observation. The angle does work well for Daughter's Defender, so let's discuss what else works well before we dive into what doesn't. Firstly, while the reality show angle does feel a little gimmicky, the situation gets real quick, and our protagonist, discount Dan, no, sorry, just Dan ends up becoming, you guessed it, his baby daughter's defender. Now, I have mixed feelings about this angle. On a positive note, it does give Dan something to fight for beyond his own survival, and his kid Aurora's situation is handled in a way that avoids her becoming a screaming distraction, as babies tend to be. But there is one problem with the chosen approach, which I'll get to in my critiques. Look, overall, especially in the beginning, Dan's need to protect his newborn baby does add a nice layer of tension to an already tense situation. I mean, I struggle to deal with my kids in a non apocalyptic situation. Come to think of it, most days do feel apocalyptic. Also, it took me way too long to realize why the baby is named Aurora. I do appreciate it when names have meanings or connections. Anyway, sometimes I'm a bit slow. Let's forget about my simpleness with some talk about the magic system. In the beginning, the magic system takes a bit of a back seat, and I was a little unenthused. But as the story progresses, the system becomes more compelling and complex, especially for Dan, who takes a unique path. Mana can be used in an interesting way, endless possibilities there, and class synchronization and synergy add an interesting dynamic and some limitations. At first, the magic system seems quite vanilla and grounded until Dan ungrounds it with his wild ideas. That's what you want from a protagonist, yeah? Reshaping reality to meet their needs. There are few things I appreciate more than a unique class, and Dan's class is different. No spoilers. Look, overall, I wouldn't say the magic system's groundbreaking, but it does feel fresh enough to justify its existence, as does the story itself. Nothing worse than a story that has no right to exist. I've written a few of those. I'll probably write a few more. Daughter's Defender is aggressively tropey with skills and stats and tiers, even down to the classic, which class will he pick? Spoiler alert for every lit RPG novel ever written, it's the last one on the list. Always the last one on the list. But here's a pro. Up until now, all the lit RPG novels I've read have been audiobooks. This was my first text based lit RPG. Oh, how easy it is to skip the stat sheet. You just keep turning pages until they're gone. It's magical. I know audiobook producers have started making it easier to skip the stat sheets, but I've been held hostage to way too many number dumps since getting into lit RPG. Sometimes I have flashbacks and I think I'm still sitting there listening to the endless stream of nonsensical stats. I'm not sure it ever stopped. Character wise, Daughter's Defender keeps it light. For a good chunk of the book, it's a duo survival situation with Dan and another character, Alex. Even though they're in town and there's meant to be a bunch of survivors, they don't seem to encounter many other people for some reason. While Dan does steal most of the on page show, Alex does get her time to shine, and we see both characters develop at a natural pace. There's also another viewpoint character, C318, who becomes a bit of an afterthought for a lot of the book, but does return in fine form later. You could argue she should have got more chapters in the middle, but that would have made the book longer, so it's a tough call. I think the story's fairly well paced now, so yeah, tough call. I do appreciate how Dan becomes more proficient and capable through hard work and training, not dumb luck or overpowered upgrades. He does become a little OP at a certain point, but not in the traditional sense. It's his weird and unique class and power set that make him, let's just say, hard to put down. Throughout the story, there's plenty of conflict and tension, twists and turns. The planetary games themselves include a bunch of trials that escalate quickly. They're a little tedious and repetitive in the beginning, but they do get more diverse as the story progresses. One trial in particular is a rough one for Dan. I actually thought it was going in a slightly different direction, so I received both a pleasant and unpleasant surprise there. I'll say that much. Moral dilemmas, plenty of those, which you want and expect in an apocalyptic setting. Dan's morals, in particular, are frequently tested, and he makes several decisions that should have led to his death. Little bit of class based plot armor there for sure. I'm starting to sound a bit critical, aren't I? All right, let's do it. Let's get critical. Firstly, the start of Daughter's Defender had me thinking I was in for a bad time. There's some questionable writing with some head scratching moments thrown in the mix. The gremlins, a frequent menace, are inconsistent. One minute they seem kind of weak, a human leg's a tough meal. The next minute they're biting through a solid steel frying pan like it's nothing. I was confused about how tough these little critters are meant to be. They seem to be as tough and as difficult to deal with as the plot demands. There's also some eye rolling dialogue. We even get a tell her I love. It's especially funny. Yes, I did laugh at an accidentally humorous character death because the person they're speaking to just said, I love you, and the dying character's response is, tell this other person I love them. The whole opening feels a little forced and wooden in some places. Honestly, the opening didn't draw me in, and I found the ending a little unsatisfying, but everything in between, the meat of the story sandwich, is great. While we're on the topic, let's discuss that ending. The story ends in the middle of a tense situation, like a TV show mid season finale, I guess. It doesn't feel like a solid conclusion to this story. Ending on a cliffhanger is great if it's in the spirit of setting up the next book. But with Dan's ending, we're in the middle of something here and we're just going to stop. There is an epilogue that provides an answer to one critical question while raising many other questions. I do appreciate that. I'm just not a fan of endings that cut off in the middle of a situation that feels like it should be resolved in some way. In my opinion, even ending earlier would have felt cleaner, setting up the situation but not throwing readers too far in before pausing for a mid situation book break. Look, it works, it's just a little messy. You know what else is messy? The apocalypse, causing characters to make an endless series of dumb decisions. For example, why barricade a town to keep nasty creatures out and not inspect said town to kill the nasty creatures already there? And what about the school situation? Why were hundreds of people still at the school when the apocalypse kicked off, when school had finished for the week? Who's hanging around after school on a Friday afternoon, whether you're a teacher or a student? The weekend's here, people, enjoy it. Maybe they were playing after school sports. I can accept that and make it work in my head. But my big question about the school sequence is, why are people starving to death in less than 3 weeks? 3 week water fasts are a thing. Are the people who do those fasts flirting with death? Probably, yeah. Oh, the funniest thing about people dying of starvation in this situation, yes, their deaths are funny. Why? Because they're in a food storage room. There are a few other head scratching moments sprinkled throughout, along with some clunky writing, but nothing that distracts from the story too much. It's simple prose, which works well for this type of novel. It's kind of expected in the lit RPG genre. Can't let complex or flowery prose get in the way of a good story. I'm all for it. With that said, I would have liked some more vivid descriptions so I could acknowledge and then ignore them, as I tend to do. I'm a description minimalist, but there's a difference between minimal and non existent. It's not that bad. Just a little more detail sprinkled throughout would have been nice. One more point before I get to my final critique. Dan mentions Jimmy rigging something at some point. I always thought the term was jerry rig. Apparently, they're both a thing. What's next? Johnny rigging? Jenny rigging? Benny rigging? It's madness, I say. All right, my final critique, and it centers on the story's main concept and angle: daughter's defender. Dan's ultimate motivation is his daughter's defense. It's in the title. My problem is, and there's a reason for this, but Aurora comes across as more of an inanimate object than a real character, and she's conveniently somehow always, almost always out of the way whenever Dan's in a scuffle. At the start, she feels real enough, and the situation does elicit an emotional response, but as the story goes on, she no longer feels like a character. It's just hard to care about Dan's motivation to protect her at that point. It's like he's protecting his favorite hat. There's potential for that dynamic to change, but in book one, Aurora does feel like a baby shaped object rather than an actual baby. Critiques aside, overall, I thoroughly enjoyed Daughter's Defender. It's so different from all the other lit RPG novels I've read so far. So, if you're into darker lit RPG set in the modern era with guns and machetes and all that fun stuff, and a protagonist with a unique class, chances are you'll also thoroughly enjoy Daughter's Defender. Side note, I mentioned this book in an unscripted video in, I'm going to say March, but I said the name wrong so many times it didn't make the cut. Funnily enough, I later read that characters in the book make the same mistake. Daughter's defender become defender's daughter. It's an easy one to make, and when I read that, I was just glad to learn I'm not alone. Yes, there are some fictional characters who are as simple as me. What a relief. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy this video, hit subscribe anyway and hate watch my content. That's always fun.